Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar on avian diversity in the Craggy Mountains. I'm Carl Silverstein with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. I'm thrilled to welcome Steve Goodman, wildlife biologist with the National Parks Conservation Association, and Sarah Sheeran, stewardship director for Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. We'll take about 45 minutes to an hour, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. So please type questions into the Q&A or the chat, and I think we can go ahead and get started. We really appreciate, Steve, you and Sarah making this presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Carl and Sarah and Emma. And thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share our avian work today. First off, all the adult bird photos I'm going to show you in this presentation were borrowed from Macaulay Library, and all other photos and sounds are from the Craggy-Big Ivy. So it's striking how quiet the forest in the Craggy-Big Ivy can be in the winter. If you sit or walk long enough, you might hear the subdued rustlings, calls, and twitterings of some of our permanent bird residents, or maybe the low-pitched grok-grok of a lone raven echoing across the many coves and spur ridges, or maybe some of our short-distance migrants, also residents, but those that tend to drift down in the fall and winter from their higher elevation breeding grounds. Here in South Asheville, where I live, I get a special kick out of seeing juncos and kinglets and winter wrens, and especially yellow-bellied sapsuckers and hermit thrush in the winter, knowing that in a few months, we will be hearing them in full song several thousand feet higher in elevation in our study area. But the avian party doesn't really kick off until mid to late March, when the first arrival of long-distance neotropical migrants from Mexico, Central and South America, and the Caribbean islands show up. The first harbingers of spring in Big Ivy and elsewhere are blue-headed vireos, followed by Louisiana water thrush, black-throated green, and black and white warblers. By late April, the forest swept up in a diversity of sound and color from an especially rich and abundant bird life, including a bonanza of warblers and vireos shown here, flycatchers, thrushes, and more. Early mornings are truly an immersive experience. So I do hope everybody could hear that. Otherwise, that was a really uncomfortable 30-second silence. Based on USGS breeding bird survey data, abundance of North American migrant birds has declined 58% since the 1970s, a loss of 3 billion birds. Using this data and Cornell's eBird status and trends, the North American Bird Conservation Initiative has categorized species as tipping point species, or those with perilously low populations and long-term population losses, watch list species that are vulnerable due to small or declining populations or limited distributions, common birds in steep decline. These are birds that are still abundant, but nevertheless have experienced long-term declines. And even the low concern species, half of them have experienced long-term declines. Eastern forest birds have declined 64%, including Cerulean Warblers, shown here with a 70% decline. Canada Warblers, 62% decline. And here in North Carolina, this species, along with black-throated blue, black-burnian, black-throated green, and chestnut-sided warblers, along with Veery and red-breasted grosbeak, are among those referred to as trailing edge species, as their southernmost populations are in the higher elevations of the Southern Appalachians. and that makes them especially vulnerable in need of conservation. And then we have wood thrushes declining by 55%, eastern towhees 53%, chimney swifts 72%, black-billed cuckoos 68%, golden crown kinglets 30%, yellow-billed cuckoos 50%. And then we have veeries declining 38%, rose-breasted grosbeaks 24%, chestnut-sided warblers 33%, indigo buntings 30%, and even dark-eyed juncos 44% decline since the 1970s. In North Carolina, there are additional species of greatest conservation need per North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission, like northern saw-whet owl, Swainson's and worm-eating warblers, and those with knowledge gaps like yellow-bellied sapsucker. All these birds and dozens more occur within the proposed Craggy Wilderness and National Scenic Area across its diverse natural communities and elevation gradients. Sustainable forest interior bird populations in the Southern Appalachians are dependent on extensive tracts of mature forest with structural complexities shaped by natural disturbance, which are well represented in the Craggy-Big Ivy. This new designation would maintain current multi-uses of hiking, biking, hunting, and fishing, and wildlife viewing while restricting new logging and road development. This study has been a collaborative research project with multiple partners, contributing subject matter and study design expertise, equipment and funding support, GIS mapping and modeling, field assistance, and land access. Heartfelt thanks to all these partners in making our project a success so far. And a special shout out to my colleagues, Jeff Hunter, Olivia Porter, Ebony Preston, along with our funders who have made NPCA's participation possible. And I should say several of these organizations, including NPCA, are actively pursuing or support the National Scenic Area status, while others may or may not. So I just want to make sure I let everybody know that. But what's important is where we all come together is the importance and need of increased study and data collection for bird conservation. So kind of a common purpose with this research. Our 16,000 acre study area sits within the Black Mountains geographic area of the Appalachian Ranger District within the Pisgah National Forest, and is mostly comprised of mature forest, including over 3,000 acres with old growth characteristics, or primary forest characteristics, and an elevation range from a little below 2,600 feet along Dillingham Creek to over 5,900 feet atop Big Butt Peak. It is one of the most outstanding and photographed watersheds or viewsheds along the Blue Ridge Parkway, with more than 80% visible from the parkway. The genesis of this research was the presence of the largest known population of Cerulean Warblers, circled here, in North Carolina, mostly documented along the parkway and within the Audubon Bull Creek important bird area. Our interest was to what extent does this population extend further into the surrounding Pisgah National Forest? But after a deep dive into the literature and the emerging data on the declines of neotropical migrants writ large, it became quite clear that this study should also focus on the much larger assemblage of declining or vulnerable bird species. So our focal species expanded to include those listed here, in addition to just Cerulean Warblers. And as you can see, many of these are on North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission's species of greatest conservation need, who is one of the partners in this work, a very valuable partner. So in this 2-year study, we seek to, we seek to fill area-specific knowledge gaps to provide best available information for future decision-making in forest and bird conservation that will build long-term climate resiliency into the landscape. We will use results to educate and inspire the birding and non-birding public on Southern Appalachian bird diversity, causes of decline, and opportunities for increased protections. Specifically, using bioacoustic monitoring and point counts, we are assessing Cerulean Warbler absence and presence and other declining bird species, as well as the fullest avian assemblages throughout the Craggies. For our study design, we gridded out the project area into 250 meter by 250 meter grid cells, as shown here on this map, And then also on this map, you can see some of the work we did in 2024, and then also what we're planning in 2025. So we're covering a pretty large area. For Cerulean specific bioacoustic surveys, we used ArcGIS Pro to model potential habitat and select study sites based on preferred natural community type. According to the FS Veg from the U.S. Forest Service, that's the kind of the veg communities we're using for this modeling. And that was white oak, hickory, red oak. And those were selected in stands greater than or equal to 80 years old. For more of an all species approach, using both point count and bioacoustic surveys, we broadened our scope across all major natural communities. Montane oak, hickory slope, rich cove, high elevation red oak, and northern hardwood slope and cove that fell within the old growth delineations completed back in 1999 by Alan Smith, Josh Kelly, and Rob Messick. For a cursory comparison in a smaller kind of side project, we also surveyed 16 sites that were clear cut in the 1980s. For optimal ARU, so that's autonomous recording unit, so that's the bioacoustic recorder. For optimal placement of those ARUs, based on Cerulean preferences, we're using LiDAR to pinpoint locations within each selected 250 meter by 250 meter grid cell, using things like tree height, canopy gaps, and landform features. For our acoustic monitoring, we're using Wildlife Acoustics Song Meter Minis and the associated software. To analyze the sound recordings, we're using Cornell's BirdNet Automated Sound ID, which is similar to Merlin, which I'm sure most folks use. Which uses an algorithm coupled with large audio libraries and eBird location data to predict species identification. Here's a photo of one of our units deployed out in the woods. So with this data, we're going to have a multitude of analysis options. Probably too much data that we can ever use, but we'll be able to assess site richness, abundance via vocal indices. We can compare across natural communities and stand age, presence occupancy by forest age and structure using LiDAR, breeding status via song frequencies. So we have this really large data set that has a lot of possibilities, probably above my pay grade. So we'll probably need to kind of collaborate with some good quantitative folks. But before all that, what's really important is to establish a strong post-processing protocol, which we're in the process of doing now. So for our 2024 field season, which ran from April 24th through July 17th, starting at the lowest elevation sites first, we surveyed 62 sites with ARUs, and each site we deployed them between 5 and 15 days. The software detected 415,000 calls and songs. We conducted 63 unlimited radius 5-minute point counts, 47 in mature stands, and 16 in 1980s clear cuts. 13 people across 6 organizations participated in 2024, and many of those folks are going to help out again in 2025. For the BirdNet processing, we settled on a suite of settings optimal for our study that included minimum confidence levels, sensitivity, overlap, and location threshold. And here's an example of some software results. We're continuing to post-process and validate by physically listening to a sample of recordings and viewing spectrograms in Adobe Audition to identify instances of false positives and false negatives. Overall, the software is quite accurate in identifying most species. But as luck would have it, though, BirdNet doesn't do a very good job at differentiating between Cerulean Warblers and black-throated blue warblers, which can have similar song signatures in a spectrogram, as shown here, although they're pretty distinguishable by the human ear. So for those, we are manually reviewing all of them until a better custom classifier can be developed. Next, I want to share a very high level summary of detections that were vetted for accuracy across our bioacoustic study sites for several of our focal species. And for most of them, I'm also going to include some recordings from those units. We detected ceruleans at 7 sites, or 20% of the sites, below 4,100 feet, and that's generally considered kind of their elevation limit. The picture here is a nice, really old growth white oak, which they tend to prefer. They'll use other trees for nesting as well, but they tend to gravitate towards these large white oaks because they seem to prefer the large horizontal branching. We detected Canada warblers at 52 sites above 4,000 feet, and they tend to like these shrubby type areas, both deciduous, as shown here at one of the study sites, as well as rhododendron heavy areas. You can also hear a Veery calling in the background. And we detected brown creepers at 69% of the sites, over 4,000 feet. Interesting about them, and which I'm sure many folks know, is they like to sometimes build their nests in live or dead trees with exfoliating bark or flaking bark, like shown here, and they put their tiny little nests right up in there, which is pretty cool. So that brown creeper was the really high-pitched one, and there was a wood pea in the background. So chimney swifts, we detected at 50% of sites at all elevations. So what's really interesting about this species is that in pre-colonial times, it was thought to primarily nest in cavities in old growth forests. The extent in which they continue to do so today is really not well understood. But considering their overall population decline, which is really quite amazing, this is, in my view, an interesting topic worthy of some research. You got to ask yourself, can old growth forests serve as an important source population for this, drastically declining species? So that was an individual or two calling at a pretty remote site in the evening around dusk. And then the very next morning around right after dawn, we got, I don't know if it's the same one, but we got chimney swift again. So it really kind of makes you wonder, are they nesting instead of a chimney? And this is the site where that ARU is located. It's a kind of an old growth, stunted northern hardwood forest. And then we detected Veeries at 83% of the sites above 3,750 feet. And wood thrushes at 92% of the sites below 4,600 feet. And I should say, for all these, but particularly wood thrush, we did get some sites where there were only a handful of calls, and we did include those. So, not necessarily saying 92% of the sites were breeding, but 92% of the sites we detected presence while the ARUs were out. And then we detected golden crown kinglets at 100% of sites above 5,000 feet, and there was only 5 of those sites. And then one of my real favorites, yellow-bellied sapsucker, we detected at 83% of sites between 4,000 and 5,000 feet. And it's nice because this is one of the few woodpeckers that is easy, at least for me, to determine, to ID based on their drumming patterns, like the most unique drumming pattern of all the woodpeckers. Other focal species we detected, including some with high numbers, particularly the rose-breasted grosbeak, winter wren, worm-eating warbler. But then we also detected Louisiana water thrush, yellow-billed cuckoo, Acadian flycatcher, and northern saw-whet owl. So, switching gears here, Helene impacted large swaths of our study area. This is a stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway that's within the primary Cerulean Warbler population boundary. That the largest known one in North Carolina. This map shows the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI, shared by the U.S. Forest Service Southern Research Station, depicting forest impacts between October 2023 and October 2024, just after Helene. So this basically models what's expected to be the impact from Helene. The breeding cerulean population within Audubon's IBA, which is highlighted here in purple, will likely be significantly impacted. The darker color, or the pink colors, are severe damage, and white is likely damage. And I've been out to many of these sites, and it definitely, this modeling holds up. So there's a lot of damage. But some of the stands previously occupied, though diminished, do still remain and could potentially still serve as cerulean breeding grounds. They could also open up habitat for other declining species, such as red-headed woodpeckers, chestnut-sided warblers, indigo buntings, and eastern towhees. Fortunately, many other areas in the Craggies experienced only minor impacts, like where my favorite sugar maple occurs along the Big Butt Trail up from Cane River Gap. In other areas where minor impacts occurred, new canopy gaps may provide potential future cerulean breeding colonization opportunities. Finally, similar to this landslide created several years back with heavy rains, maybe 6 to 10 years ago, new and open shrub habitats created by Helene may allow new avian assemblages to develop. And all of this should make for some really interesting field work and data collection this year, as well as well into the future. So for 2025, we're planning to visit 59 new cerulean-specific modeled sites with bioacoustic monitoring, the ones that we can actually get to. And then we'll also visit additional sites across major natural communities. And we won't be doing point counts, we'll just be strictly doing the bioacoustic monitoring. And also, we're going to do some post-Helene monitoring. Chris Kelly with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission has loaned us 25 to 30 of these really cute but very capable audio moth recording units that we're going to be using for that post-Helene monitoring, and perhaps for years to come. And then also we're excited to partner with the, it looks like we're going to partner with the Park Service along the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we're going to get up to Craggy Flats Bog and deploy some units as well. So this will be a new area, a new natural community that we'll be working in. And then I'm also very excited to work with Sarah and SAHC to expand surveys into the SAHC properties, which several of which are adjacent to the Craggy-Big Ivy area. Now I'm going to put my kind of conservation biologist hat on. So this may not represent the views of all the partners, but this is kind of my view at this point. Old growth forests are profoundly important for the overall forest interior avian community. An old growth forest is not just about large trees. In fact, some don't even have large trees. Maybe they all blew down in a previous kind of natural disaster. But they're rather a forest that is relatively undisturbed by humans, where naturally occurring disturbances like fire and wind lead to a mosaic of habitat conditions at the ground, understory, midstory, and canopy level, creating highly productive conditions for ground and shrub nesting birds, as well as cavity and canopy nesters. While it might be argued that the creation of young forests through intensive logging can create high bird abundance and richness, those gains may be short-lived because 10, 15 years, 20 years after new stand initiation, logged over areas enter the stem exclusion stage that can last up to 40 years, making that stand more or less depauperate when you compare it to an old growth primary forest that has natural tree gap development, abundance of standing snags, and pit and mound ground topography. So you can compare this example from one of our 1980s clear-cut sites that we surveyed last year to an adjacent stand with more old growth or primary forest characteristics that we also sampled. From a profit standpoint, in many cases, Southern Appalachian forests reach their financial maturity at 80 to 120 years or so. But from a biodiversity perspective, that's the age when the ecological value really starts kicking in, like old growth white oaks that ceruleans favor, or pit and mound topography that provides breeding and cover areas for all types of wildlife, or standing snags for cavity nesters and bats, or unique bark for furrowing and chemistries that provide substrate for many lichens and mosses and animals like this salamander here that was up on a tree. Only approximately 3% of old growth forests remain in the eastern US, so it is a conservation imperative to preserve what's left, including within Craggy-Big Ivy, and also to allow more mature secondary forests to reach that stage of maximum biological return. In addition to logging, another threat to birds in the Craggy-Big Ivy is fragmentation and ex-urban development, which research has shown reduces the forest interior neotropical migrant bird populations that we've been talking about, not only on the properties themselves, but across boundaries, well into public and protected lands. Further, some research indicates that this proliferation in recent decades may be having an even greater impact than climate change. So now on to a much brighter, inspirational topic, and that is the critically important work, the most important work in my view, that SAHC has been doing to shore up land protections adjacent to Craggy-Big Ivy and beyond in that greater landscape. So I'm going to pass it on over to Sarah here, and then after she's done, and Sarah, take as long as you'd like, I will close with just a few final slides.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. This has been great. And while I'm in stewardship and responsible for the caring of a portfolio of properties, which includes our conservation easements and SHC preserves, I do want to give credit to our land protection team who has made this picture you see here possible. So the dark blue polygons on this map show SHC held conservation easements. Those are still in private ownership, and SAHC is responsible for ensuring those conservation values are upheld. And then the light blue properties that you see are SAHC-owned preserves. And you can see that we've been building off of public land protection. So the big dark green polygon is Forest Service. Here, sort of in the center of this photo, is the Bee Tree and Asheville watershed. And then the other polygons you're seeing are protected lands that were protected by other organizations or other entities. And so you have the Blue Ridge Parkway kind of running here through the middle. This orange kind of russet colored is Mount Mitchell State Park. So our land protection team has a priority GIS model that we are following to help us build off of the land protection efforts in the Craggies and elsewhere. We're just focusing on the Craggies here today. And if you can see, so Asheville's sort of in the southwest corner of this map here. So the high elevation areas that are important to many of the species that Steve has already highlighted here. And also just trying to help fill in some of these holes within the Forest Service. That's part of the work that a land protection team does. So what I want to show you is just maybe some representative photos of some of the properties that are within my personal portfolio that I oversee. And so in the upper left here, this is a conservation easement kind of in the Weaverville area that has, as you can see, some pretty amazing, stunning views. Actually, this is looking out here towards the Woodfin watershed, which is a conservation easement owned by the town of Woodfin. It's about 1,200 acres there. But also just really important glade and rock outcrop habitat that is important, as Steve was sort of mentioning. Kind of having a matrix of diverse habitats is important for bird conservation. This is largely a forested area, but these open sort of glade-like habitats are important not only for birds, but for plant species as well. And this property here is actually SAHC's Reams Creek Bowl property. We too are looking kind of out towards the Woodfin watershed, and the Blue Ridge Parkway is more or less on the other side of this ridge that you're seeing in the background. If we head to the upper right corner, this is a conservation easement that has the headwaters of the Cane River. So really important aquatic habitat, but for all those other birds too. I think Steve mentioned Louisiana water thrush, which would sort of love this type of habitat. And then the last property I want to highlight, kind of sandwiched here in between the Bee Tree watershed and the Asheville watershed, kind of in the Swannanoa area, is our Laura Ridge properties, which have, as you can see, sort of this steep glade-like habitat that kind of runs along the rim below the ridge of that property. So these contiguous areas that SHC continues to protect are really important, not only for the Craggies and the great work that Steve and Wildlife Resources Commission and other folks are doing, but is important to SHC's overall land protection effort to help protect high elevations here and elsewhere that I think are going to be increasingly important for avian diversity. So I think I'll pause at that and let Steve continue with his excellent story. I have just loved the bird song, Steve. Thanks for sharing that, and I'm happy to keep my eye on the chat and answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all your work and the whole land protection team. Just fabulous work. And yeah, I'm glad those songs worked out. I wasn't sure how it was gonna work out, but it sounds like they did come through. So great. Okay, just had to throw this photo in here. A quick shot of Mount Laurel with the sun rising over Rock Knob at Shope Creek. And then I just want to celebrate and thank all the people that helped with field work last year and so far this year. And I just want to give a specific shout outs to Will Harlan, Ben Prater, Will Harlan with the Center for Biological Diversity, Ben Prater and Tracy Davids with the Defenders of Wildlife, Josh Kelly and Nick Holzhauser with Mountain True, John DeLuca and Avery Young with the U.S. Forest Service, and of course, not least but last but not least, Chris Kelly and Clifton Avery with the Commission. I will maybe, I guess since we have time, I'll just go ahead and read this. So I'm just going to give a quick plug for the National Scenic Area. Again, not all the folks, partners on this work, are necessarily actively involved in this. So I don't want, to kind of conflate all of us together. This is an NPCA and actually, and some of the other NGOs, but maybe not all. But I did want to mention, in case folks are interested. So the proposed Craggy National Scenic Area would be North Carolina's first ever National Scenic Area. And in addition to preserving exemplary biodiversity and old growth forest, it will protect one of the most beloved vistas from the Blue Ridge Parkway. It has overwhelming public, political, and community support. The city of Asheville and Buncombe County have passed unanimous bipartisan resolutions supporting Craggy, and more than 30,000 people, 33,000 people have submitted comments supporting Craggy. So if you're interested, you can voice your support for the Craggy National Scenic Area at iheartpisgah.org or by contacting Senator Tillis or Representative Edwards. And that's all I'll say about that. And then I just want to briefly mention that we have also completed in 2024 a small year one pilot bat survey effort where we deployed ARUs. There's one picture here. So they're similar, but they're designed for ultrasonic detections. So we're hoping to repeat this year, maybe expand upon it. And we're really interested in the northern long-eared bat, the Indiana myotis and tricolored bat, as well as other species. Many of those species are, a couple of these are actually on the federal endangered species list, but there's also a host of other ones on the Commission's species of greatest conservation need. So the bat work, I think, will be very important. And that's it. So thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Steve and Sarah. We have had a few questions asked, and I saw where Sarah shared in the chat a link to a bird tracker, neotropical tracker, that y'all may want to take a look at. But I guess a question, Steve, that one of the participants had asked was about the difference in the North Carolina side and the Tennessee side, if ceruleans have been seen on the Tennessee side, if there's similarities, differences.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. And I have to be honest, Cerulean Warblers this last year is my first time really working with ceruleans. I've done a lot of bird work in the past, but never focused on the species. But based on literature review, talking to subject matter experts, so the core population of ceruleans is like in the Cumberlands, and in North Carolina we kind of have this disjunct population in the mountains, and then also I think along like the Raleigh River or some kind of river that goes through Raleigh. So I don't know like their relationships, but our populations are not as widespread and abundant as they are in the Cumberlands and as you move up into the Northeast. So we kind of have a disjunct population that is neat, but at the same time pretty vulnerable. And they seem to be keying in to these kind of, our mountain areas. So I hope that answers to some degree, but I don't know a lot about the Tennessee ceruleans, to be honest.
Thanks, Steve. We've also had a question about multi-season occupancy, if there's plans to model that in order to, I guess, look at colonization and extinction patterns.
Everything's on the table. Right now we've just been, when I say multi-seasons, I mean, we are, really just looking at the breeding season. With the exception of northern saltwood owls, we will get out, well, it'll be their breeding season, but it'll be more, when they call earlier in the spring. We're focusing on just breeding season. But as far as occupancy modeling, all that, again, I'm not like I know enough to get in trouble. But I think if we design our study right, I think there's a lot of analysis opportunities, including occupancy modeling. And talking to Chris Kelly, who has done occupancy modeling on ceruleans along the Parkway, they have a long-term monitoring project. We've talked about, because we have this really good data set pre-Helene, now we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as the forest heals and changes and whatnot, especially in the face of climate change, to continue monitoring and see these changes over time. So there's in addition to occupancy modeling, there's just a lot of other opportunities. So I look forward to chatting with folks more about that.
Cool, thanks. Jeff has asked if you could talk about ground nesting birds in the Craggies.
Yeah. So good question. So you have black and white warblers, ovenbirds, worm-eating warblers. Let's see what else. Veeries can nest on the ground, Canada warblers. So there's actually quite a bit of ground nesters. Yeah, I know there's one I'm thinking of, I can't remember. But a lot of times when you're walking through the forest, and you're going off trail for research. I mean, if you're walking, all of a sudden a bird flies up, because these birds will wait till you almost like step on them, and they'll fly up, maybe they'll do a broken wing, and you're like right almost stepping on their nest. You just realize how vulnerable ground nesting species are. And so when you get like in these exurban habitats, exurban zones around these natural areas, you have dogs running through, you have, higher numbers of mesoconifers like raccoons and stuff are just like grazing the area, and that makes these ground nesters especially vulnerable. So we do have quite a guild of ground nesters that are really exciting, but then also very vulnerable.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
There was a question about what folks can do to advocate for increasing the reserves of mature forest, and I assume that the scenic area proposal would kind of do that for the Craggies, and I wonder if you might want to talk about specifically what that scenic area proposal might change from what the current management is, not putting you on the spot, but for folks who are interested in kind of advocating for that, what it might accomplish.
Sure. Well, first, let me just, I'm afraid to get off my PowerPoint because I may lose it, and just in case somebody has a question, but let me just say the website, if you are interested in learning more, is heart, like the heart in your body, Pisgah is in the National Forest.org. So you can learn more about there. So in essence, what this would do, it would limit any new logging. And I'm kind of new to the game. When we started this, we weren't very active in the National Scenic Area. A lot of our other partners have been doing this for actually years, working on a National Scenic Area. But I've read through the proposal, or the legislation, the proposed legislation, and so it would limit any new, like, large scale logging. I think there are some parts in there would allow for, instances of fire danger, or maybe even endangered species, and like limited soft touches kind of thing. It would still allow all the multi-uses currently being used: hiking, biking, wildlife viewing, hunting, fishing. But it would also not allow the development of any more roads. If you go back in there, you start walking around, you just see all the old logging roads. And so that would stop any new logging roads from going in as well. So let me think if there's anything else. And then of course it would protect the view shed, as far as being, seeing, clear-cut forest or logging and whatnot. But in essence, it would preserve the forest. It would not be a highly managed forest anymore necessarily. So it would be a step up from, typical management, but below like a national monument or something. So there's, you can add into that language, like things that are important to make sure the Forest Service can manage it, properly with those new limitations. But I would suggest to get a better answers to your questions, to contact the website and email some of the folks who've been working on this for many, many years. NPCA and myself, we originally came in, we were really fascinated with that Cerulean Warbler population, and we're just like, hey, we know there's this proposal for a National Scenic Area. Can we add value by potentially doing some study and research? And the answer was yes. And so that's kind of how we got into it. But we also now support the scenic area.
Perfect. Thanks for answering that. And I think we also have a question sort of from the other side of the coin, where whether it says there's so much privately held land where there's really people don't have a say in how those forests are managed. Should public land managers manage forest land to create structural conditions needed for a wide diversity of species, and that might include some forest management. So I infer from that question they're asking about public lands management that might create early successional habitat and other types of things that might come from forest management.
I mean, that's a great question. That's a great question. It's things I've thought about a lot. And having read, I mean, dozens and dozens of papers on this, how it relates to birds, and even just, hardcore forestry papers. I'm still relatively new to this area. I've only been here 8 years, but I have worked in a lot of forests across this country, longleaf pines, rainforest in the Northwest, Arkansas forests. But I think the conventional wisdom was, yes, we get these natural disturbances, but they're not big enough to bring on those kind of early successional kind of developments that we would like for, for birds and other species. Well, I think Helene kind of showed that that is not the case. We've lost 20% of our forest, which now will be early successional forest. So those disturbances do occur. Now, this one may be human-related climate change, but there's going to be early successional habitat writ large across 20% of our forests. So that's more, I mean, that's almost 100 or now 1,000-fold difference than what's already being planned within the Forest Service their forest management plan. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic, and I think there's a lot of debate. When you think about an old growth forest, and you kind of get away from the idea of big trees, but think about trees that are all different ages, right? And hurricane comes through, wind, tornado, you develop these natural gaps, right? And they can serve as your early successional. And I think up until Helene, the question was, is that going to be enough for what we want, those early successional? And I will say, working in the Craggies, I don't know the complete history, but we do get certain species like eastern towhees, chestnut-sided warblers. I mean, a lot of this is probably due to some natural disasters, also with disease. But I think one thing now with Helene, with some of these mature forests, can we really lose what's left now with the with the changes that have happened? And then also, I think a lot of research, sometimes they compare early successional to mature forests, but those mature forests really aren't old growth forests because we don't really have a lot of old growth to do true comparisons in research. And so when I think of an old growth or primary forest, I'm thinking 200, 300, 400 years old, not 80 to 100 years. So I think there's a lot we don't know, but I know it's an ongoing debate on how you establish early successional. And one last thing I'll add that I'll think about, and this is just me being older, been doing this for a long time, is the mitigation infrastructure. What does it require to do that? And can you keep doing it in a methodical way and be successful? Or will you run out of money and whatnot? And so should we be building forests, preparing them for natural disasters? Anyway, there's a lot to think about there. I threw a big word salad out there. But the debate's still out. I know where I lead towards, just because I think sometimes we want to do things and we want to overmanage or maybe manage correctly, but we don't have the funds to do it, so we end up not doing it anyway. So it's, I can see both sides. So I hope that was a nuanced enough answer.
Thank you, Steve.
That was respectful of the person to answer because it's a great question.
Thanks. And there was a question about ruffed grouse and how their populations are holding up. And Sarah shared some information in the chat, but you may have some thoughts you want to share.
Now, I don't know a lot about ruffed grouse, I'll admit to you, but we do pick them up. It's interesting at some of these higher elevation sites. I think they may be sites where there had been like beech bark disease or something where that kind of, the land, it's kind of opened up a little bit, but we have got them there. So I can't really comment on that. I will say the Craggies is mostly really rugged. So, it's just, I just wonder how much early successional work can be done that's still accessible for if, rough grouse is something you want to hunt for. Like it's not, some of these areas are pretty rugged. So, it's, there's that to consider.
Yeah,
too.
and I'll just say, add anecdotally, when I'm out in the woods, I feel like almost every property I go to, generally speaking, I either hear one drumming or I might flush one when I'm walking along boundaries or on old roadbeds. So I know that they're listed as a species of greatest conservation need, but I have been encouraged to see so many, at least in my outings in the woods.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Sarah. I'm the same way. There's never like a whole bunch of them, and maybe you'll come across like a gap, naturally create a gap or whatnot. But yeah, I'm the same way. So it might be hard to, if you were like maybe wanting to hunt them, it might be, challenging. Maybe some extra hiking and stuff, but they are there for sure. And we actually used to get them even on our cameras when we do our wildlife connectivity work along I-40 and the Pigeon River Gorge and I-26. We'll get them back up in the woods, even in areas like that, at our cameras.
I see we're coming up on an hour, and so can't thank you enough, Steve, for this fantastic presentation, and Sarah as well. And want to encourage folks to look for future webinars because we'll be doing a series coming up. And also, we'll be hosting some outings for people to go birding. I know that on June 14th, we have the June Jamboree in the Rhone, and I think we're going to add a bird hike to that if we can. So really appreciate everybody's interest in attending this webinar, and hope to see you at another one again soon.